She built a $500 million empire and never once left a light on for anyone. Then one stormy Atlanta night, the gate failed, a little girl knocked, and everything Victoria Ashworth thought she knew about power, and people came undone. If this story moves you, like and subscribe. The storm had been building since noon. The kind of slow Atlanta summer storm that didn't announce itself with drama, but instead gathered quietly over the Buckhead Hills until the sky turned the color of a bruise and the air smelled like wet concrete and electricity. By 9 in the evening, the rain was coming down in long diagonal sheets across the grounds of the Ashworth estate, and the motion sensor lights along the stone driveway flickered twice before going steady again. Victoria noticed the flicker from across the room. She noticed everything. That was both her greatest skill and the thing that made sleep difficult most nights. She stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main sitting room, one hand loosely wrapped around a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched in 20 minutes, and listened to Raymond Cole talk. Raymond was 62, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular kind of confidence that came from having been the smartest person in most rooms for most of his life. He sat in the leather chair across from the fireplace, one ankle crossed over his knee, a bourbon in his hand, talking about market positioning and acquisition windows, the way other men talked about the weather casually, as though the outcomes were already decided and the conversation was merely courtesy. "The window closes in 72 hours, Raymond said, swirling his glass. "After that, the Singapore group moves in, and we lose the leverage entirely." Victoria turned from the window. She was 34, though most people who met her for the first time placed her older, not because she looked tired, but because she carried herself with the kind of stillness that usually took decades to develop. She wore a deep red dress that fit the way expensive things fit precisely and without apology, and her dark hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she had done it herself in under 3 minutes and still looked more polished than most people managed in 30. "The leverage isn't going anywhere," she said. Her voice was even unhurried. "Chen's team needs our distribution network more than they need the Singapore capital. We're not the ones with the closing problem." Raymond smiled, the way men smiled when they were being corrected by someone they weren't entirely sure they should listen to. It was a small smile, controlled, the kind that didn't reach the eyes. Ethan appeared in the doorway from the hallway, holding his own drink and wearing the expression he wore when he wanted Victoria to read his mind and she was choosing not to. Ethan was 6 years older than Victoria, handsome in the way of men who had always been handsome and knew it, and he had the particular talent of making any room feel slightly more comfortable and slightly less important at the same time. He caught her eye and tilted his head almost imperceptibly toward Raymond, which was his way of saying, "Wrap this up," which was also his way of not understanding that deals worth $500 million did not get wrapped up because someone's husband was tired of company. Then the lights went out. Not all of them. The main power held, but the exterior system, the gate panel, the perimeter sensors along the east wall, all of it dropped at once, with a sound like a quiet exhale. Victoria set her glass down. "Storm took the exterior grid," Ethan said, moving to the window. "Security is probably already on it." He was right. Somewhere in the east wing of the grounds, the overnight security team would be pulling on rain gear and heading toward the breaker panel housed in the small utility building near the garage. It happened twice a year, always in summer, always during the kind of storm that came in sideways. The automated gate at the front of the property, the one that required a keycard or a remote signal to open, would have defaulted to its manual position. Not open, but no longer actively locked. It was a design flaw Victoria had noted in a facilities memo 14 months ago, and that had not yet been corrected. She made a note to correct it in the morning. Then she heard the knock. It was not loud. It was the kind of knock that apologized for itself even as it was happening, 3 quick, light taps, the kind made by a small hand that wasn't entirely sure it had the right to be making any sound at all. Victoria looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the door. Raymond said nothing, but his expression shifted into the careful blankness of a man recalibrating. "I'll get it," Victoria said. She crossed the foyer in 6 steps and opened the door to the width of her shoulder. The porch light was on that circuit, at least, had held, and in its yellow circle stood a girl. She was small, maybe 9, maybe 10, thin, in the way children get when meals have been irregular for long enough that the body accepts it as normal. She was black with 2 braids, one of which had come loose and fallen across her shoulder. She wore a purple jacket that was wet through and slightly too large for her. And she was holding a baby boy against her chest with both arms, his face tucked against her neck, his eyes closed with the exhausted peace of a child who had cried himself into something close to sleep. The girl looked up at Victoria without flinching, without performing distress, without the exaggerated helplessness that adults sometimes coach children into when they wanted something from strangers. She just looked at her the way a person looks when they have already been turned away enough times tonight that they have run out of energy for anything other than the truth. She had walked a long time to get here, stopping twice under bus shelters, when Mason got too heavy, setting him down on a dry step to rest her arms before lifting him again. "Ma'am," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "I'm only asking for a glass of milk. It's for my brother. He's hungry." Victoria did not move for a moment. Behind her, she heard Ethan take 3 steps toward the foyer and stop. She heard Raymond set his bourbon glass down on the side table with a soft, definitive click. The rain came down around the girl on the porch without mercy, and she stood in it and waited, and she did not look away. Victoria opened the door wider, not all the way, just enough. It was an instinctive incremental movement, the kind the body makes before the mind has finished its argument. And she was aware of it happening without quite deciding to allow it. The girl on the porch did not step forward. She had learned. It seemed not to move until she was told to. "What's your name?" Victoria asked. "Lily," the girl said. "And him, Mason. He's 2. Victoria studied her for a moment, the soaked jacket, the careful way Lily held her brother so that his face stayed sheltered from the rain, the way her eyes moved, with a quiet alertness that didn't belong to a child who was simply lost. There was a system behind those eyes, a person making assessments. "How did you get to this address?" Victoria asked. Lily hesitated, and in the pause, Ethan appeared at Victoria's shoulder. He looked at the girl the way he looked at most problems, with a calm managerial appraisal that had long since learned to separate urgency from inconvenience. "There's a system for this," he said quietly enough that the words were meant for Victoria and not the child. "We can call the family services line. They're equipped." Lily heard him anyway. Children heard everything. "I don't need to stay," she said quickly, shifting Mason's weight with practiced ease. "I just need milk for my brother and a way to get to Mercy General Hospital. I have the address. I won't touch anything. I'll go right after." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, not with cruelty, with the specific impatience of a man who had built a life in which unexpected variables were managed outward rather than absorbed inward. Victoria said, "Raymond, give us a minute." There was a pause from inside the house, the sound of a man deciding whether to be offended. And then Raymond said, "Of course," in the tone of someone who had decided not to be offended out loud. Victoria stepped back from the door. "Come under the porch light," she said. Lily moved forward 2 steps, just far enough that the porch roof cut the rain. She stood there with Mason held against her, and waited again with that same unnerving patience. "You said Mercy General," Victoria said. "Why?" Lily reached into the pocket of her jacket with one hand, slowly, carefully, as though she had learned that sudden movements made adults nervous, and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. Mrs. Holt had pressed it into her hand at the door before she left, telling her to show it to anyone who might help. The paper was soft at the creases from being handled, the edges slightly translucent from the damp. She held it out to Victoria. Victoria took it. She unfolded it under the porch light. The handwriting was hurried, pressed hard into the page, the kind of writing done in a moment of fear when speed matters more than neatness. It read, "Ruby Mae Cooper, Mercy General Hospital Emergency Dept. Cardiac Unit 1400 Peachtree Lane, Annie, Atlanta. Brought in by ambulance 6:15 p.m. Neighbor contact Mrs. Margaret Holt apartment, 4C. If Lily comes home, tell her grandma is at Mercy General. Wait for Mr. James Webb to drive her. Do not let the children walk alone. Victoria read it once. Then she read it again. Behind her she heard Ethan move closer. She turned the paper so he could see. His expression shifted not dramatically, not with any outward acknowledgement, but the slight tension around his eyes softened by a fraction. She's telling the truth, Victoria said, not to Ethan, not to anyone in particular. She looked back at Lily. Your grandmother had a heart episode. Yes, ma'am. I wasn't home yet. I was late because the bus got crowded, and Mason dropped his shoe, and I was picking it up when the stop passed, and I had to get off wrong and walk back, and by the time I got home, Mrs. Holt said she was already gone. The explanation came in one long breath, the way children spoke when they were afraid the adult would stop listening before they finished. Mrs. Holt said to wait for Mr. Webb. But Mason kept saying Nana, and I thought if Grandma woke up and we weren't there, she'd be scared. Victoria looked at the paper again. Ruby Mae Cooper. The name settled somewhere in the back of her mind like a stone dropped into deep water. She could feel it falling but couldn't yet hear it land. Familiar in the way that things were familiar before you understood why. She folded the paper once and held it. From inside the house, Raymond Cole appeared in the doorway of the foyer, his bourbon replaced with his phone, his expression composed into the careful neutrality of a man making calculations. I don't want to interrupt, he said, in the voice of a man who very much wanted to interrupt, but we do have a conversation that has a timeline. Victoria looked at him. Then she looked at Lily. Lily was looking at Mason's face, adjusting him slightly, so his head rested at a better angle, completely absorbed in the small task of keeping her brother comfortable, as though the conversation happening around her was entirely someone else's business, and she had long since made her peace with waiting. Victoria said, Raymond, I'll call you tomorrow morning. The silence that followed was brief and total. Victoria Ethan said, There's a timing window. I know what the window is. She stepped back from the door and held it open. Lily, come inside. Lily stepped over the threshold. The way someone stepped into a place they were not certain they were allowed to exist in with exaggerated care. Her feet placed deliberately, her shoulders drawn slightly inward, her eyes doing a quick practiced inventory of surfaces she should not touch. She was the kind of careful that children became when they had learned that adults could revoke kindness over very small things. And watching it, Victoria felt something shift in her chest that she did not immediately have a name for. Raymond Cole said good night from the foyer, in the measured tone of a man banking a grievance for later use. The front door closed behind him with a soft, expensive click, and the sound of the rain reclaimed the house. Ethan stood in the entrance to the kitchen with his arms folded, and his expression held carefully neutral, not hostile, not warm, occupying the precise middle distance of a man waiting to see which way things would go before he committed to a position. Victoria moved to the kitchen and turned on the low light over the stove. She filled a small saucepan with milk and set it over the lowest heat. Simple. She hadn't done something that simple in a long time. The kitchen was large and still and smelled of the cedar paneling and the faint ghost of whatever the housekeeper had made for dinner. Lily climbed onto the edge of a bar stool at the kitchen island and settled Mason in her lap, with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it long enough that it no longer required conscious effort. Victoria watched her do it. How long have you been taking care of him? She asked. Since he was little, Lily said. He's still little. A small, tired pause. Smaller before. Victoria stirred the milk. Ethan moved to the other side of the island, leaned against the counter, and spoke in the low register he used when he was being diplomatic. We should call the hospital before anything else. Verify the situation. I'm going to, Victoria said. She kept her voice even. After what? She looked at him briefly. He looked back. He understood. He didn't agree, but he understood. And for Ethan, those two things had long since learned to coexist. She poured the warm milk into a ceramic mug and set it on the counter in front of Lily. "Careful, it's warm." Lily touched the side of the mug, first testing it with her palm, the way an adult would, then lifted it to Mason's mouth. The boy drank slowly, both small hands wrapped around the mug, though Lily still bore most of the weight, and as the milk went in, a little color seemed to return to his face. His eyelids fluttered, once heavy with exhaustion, and something close to relief. Victoria watched this and did not say anything. After a moment, she turned to the refrigerator. She took out a container of chicken soup, set it in a pot, bread on a plate, the strawberries from the upper shelf that she'd been saving for breakfast. She put all of it on the counter without comment. Lily looked at the food, and her expression shifted with something between gratitude and alarm. "That's too much," she said. "It's soup," Victoria said. "I didn't ask for food." "No. You asked for milk. I'm adding soup." Lily looked at the bowl, then at Mason, then back at Victoria, with the wary assessment of someone who had learned that things offered without visible price tags sometimes had hidden ones. "My grandma doesn't like owing," she said. "That makes two of us," Victoria said. She stepped away to call Mercy General. She moved to the edge of the kitchen, but stayed where Lily could see her. She had already understood, without being told, that the girl would panic if an adult disappeared to make a phone call. The hospital line transferred her twice. On the third transfer, when she said her name, the pace of the conversation changed. It always did. She had spent years being ambivalent about that fact. Tonight, she was simply grateful for it. The nurse on the duty line said, "You have Lily with you?" "Yes," Victoria said. "Oh, thank God." The relief in the nurse's voice was immediate and unguarded. "We've had security on notice. The neighbor called 3 times. Is she all right? Is the baby all right? They're both fine? What's the status on Ruby Cooper?" A brief, careful pause. "She's in the cardiac unit. Stable for now, but we're still running evaluations. I can't give details over the phone unless you're—" "I'm bringing them in," Victoria said. "Please do. And Miss Ashworth, tell Lily her grandmother has been asking for her every time she's been conscious enough to speak." Victoria stood very still for a moment. Then she said, "I'll tell her," and ended the call. She turned back to the kitchen. Lily had set the spoon down. Her face had gone to that particular stillness, the braced stillness of a child who has learned to read adult expressions before the words arrive and was already preparing herself. "She's there," Victoria said. "Your grandmother is at Mercy General." Lily's hands tightened around Mason. "Is she?" "She's asking for you," Victoria said. "Every time she wakes up." Lily exhaled once, a short, involuntary sound, and looked down at her brother. She didn't cry. She pressed her lips together and held herself very carefully. The way people held themselves when they knew that falling apart was something they couldn't afford right now. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Victoria with an expression she knew well measured. "Reasonable and wrong. I can call a car service," he said. "Get them to the hospital safely." Victoria was already taking her car keys from the hook beside the refrigerator. She held them for a moment, then, in a movement that surprised even herself, she set them back down. Then she took them again. She thought of the tinted SUV, the driver, the professional distance that would put a pane of glass between her and whatever this night was becoming. She put the keys in her pocket. "I'll drive," she said. The garage held 4 vehicles. Victoria walked past the Range Rover, past the black Escalade that Marcus, her regular driver, kept detailed to a standard she had never actually inspected, but had always taken on faith. She stopped at the third car, a dark blue Audi A7 that she had bought 2 years ago, after a long stretch of 14-hour days, when she'd told herself she would start driving herself again, and then had not. She opened the driver's side door. Lily was standing behind her with Mason awake now, and quiet in her arms, watching Victoria with the steady, patient attention of a child who had learned to read situations quickly, and was reading this one carefully. "You're driving?" Lily asked. "Is that a problem?" Lily considered this with genuine seriousness. "No, ma'am." Victoria had texted her overnight driver on the way to the garage. Don't come tonight. I'll handle it. Marcus had sent back a single question mark. She hadn't replied. She didn't have a clean explanation for why she was doing this herself, and she had long since stopped inventing explanations for things she couldn't cleanly explain. What she knew was that whatever was happening tonight, she wanted no intermediary, no one to overhear, no one to report back, no professional witnessing of something she had not yet decided how to categorize. She helped Lily into the back seat, checked that Mason was secured, and pulled out of the garage into the rain. The estate gate, the one that should have been locked, the one that should have required her remote to open, swung manually at a push of a button from the interior panel, its automated locking mechanism still offline. She made a note for the second time that night to have it fixed. They drove south on Peachtree Road, in the rain with the windshield wipers making their quiet, steady rhythm and the city lights bleeding color through the wet glass. Atlanta, at 9:30 on a weeknight, was neither asleep nor fully awake, restaurants still lit, a few pedestrians moving quickly under umbrellas. The traffic thinned to something manageable. Lily sat in the back seat with Mason in her lap and looked out the window with an expression that Victoria could see in the rearview mirror. Not the blank detachment of exhaustion, but something more active, more deliberate, as though she was memorizing the route, building a map she could use next time. Victoria thought about that. Next time. She glanced at the folded paper on the passenger seat. Ruby Mae Cooper. She picked it up at a red light and looked at it again, the name sitting at the edge of something she couldn't yet reach. It was the kind of almost memory that lived in the body rather than the mind. Not an image, not a voice, but a physical sensation, like the ghost of a pressure on the arm. She set the paper back down when the light changed. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. She kept her eyes on the road. "Yes, ma'am. You made a list, in your notebook, all the houses you knocked on." A pause from the back seat. "Small. You saw that I saw the book on the counter when you were eating." Another pause, longer this time. "I didn't want to knock on the same ones again," Lily said, "in case I got more lost." Victoria said nothing for a moment. The rain intensified briefly, drumming against the roof of the car in a fast, irregular pattern, then eased back. "You drew a map too," Victoria said, "of the neighborhood." "Yes, ma'am. And you marked my house." She could see Lily in the mirror, very still. "You said your light was red," Victoria said. "The lamp in the front window. You wrote it, looked warm." Lily looked out the window. After a moment she said quietly and without drama, "Most of the lights were white." White lights looked like offices. The red one looked like somebody was home. Victoria drove the rest of the way to Mercy General without speaking, and the silence in the car was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happened when something true had been said, and both people were willing to let it sit. She had been in 10,000 meetings in her adult life and had almost never experienced that kind. She pulled into the hospital parking structure on Peachtree Lane just after 10. She sat in the car for a moment after she cut the engine, the rain loud on the concrete above them. Then she looked in the mirror at Lily, who was already looking at her. "She's been asking for you," Victoria said again, "every time she wakes up." Lily nodded once and gathered Mason against her chest and waited for Victoria to open the door. The emergency department of Mercy General at 10 on a Wednesday night moved with the particular rhythm of a place that had learned to treat chaos as routine. Voices overlapped near the intake desk. A stretcher moved past with someone on it, whose face Victoria deliberately did not look at. And somewhere down the left hallway, a machine beeped in a sequence that the staff clearly recognized as non-urgent because no one moved quickly toward it. Lily stayed close to Victoria without touching her. Not clinging, just close, in the way of a person who had identified a stable point in an unstable environment and was maintaining proximity without making demands on it. Mason was awake and quiet, his head resting on Lily's shoulder, his eyes doing the wide, slow inventory of a 2-year-old encountering a new place for the first time. At the desk, Victoria gave the name. Ruby Mae Cooper. Cardiac unit. Her granddaughter is here. The intake nurse looked up and then looked at Victoria, with the specific quality of recognition that Victoria had learned to identify, the slight recalibration of posture and attention that happened when people connected her face to her name. Miss Ashworth, we've been expecting you. We spoke on the phone. We did. How is she stable? Dr. Reeves is with her. He'll want to speak with you. The nurse looked at Lily with a softness that was entirely different from the professionalism she'd shown Victoria. You must be Lily. Yes, ma'am. Your grandma has been asking for you something fierce. Let's get you to her. They were guided through a corridor, and then another, past doors marked with terms Lily probably didn't know, past people sitting in chairs, with the particular stillness of those who had been waiting long enough to stop rehearsing how to respond to news. Victoria noticed how many people looked up as they passed, not at her this time but at Lily, a child moving through a hospital with purpose, not carried, not led by the hand, walking on her own towards something. At the door of the cardiac unit room, the guide paused. She's just inside. Lily stopped. Victoria looked down at her. You ready? Lily nodded. But she said in a voice that had gone very small, what if she looks different? Victoria was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then she'll still hear your voice, she said, and she'll know you're there. Lily pushed the door open. The room was quiet, the way hospital rooms were quiet, not peaceful, but managed. The noise reduced to the mechanical and the necessary. Mae Cooper lay in the bed with her eyes closed, her hands resting open on the blanket, the monitors beside her casting a faint green light across her face. She was in her late 60s, her hair silver and close-cropped, her face deeply lined in the way of people whose lines came from living rather than from age alone. The structure of her face was strong, even in rest, a jaw that suggested stubbornness, a mouth that suggested warmth. Lily walked to the bed without hesitation and stood on her toes to see over the rail. Nana, she said. It was barely louder than breath. Something changed in the room. Victoria felt it before she saw it, a quality shift in the air. The way the atmosphere in a space adjusts when something important is about to happen. Ruby's fingers moved first, just a small curl against the blanket, reflexive and slow. Then her eyes opened. They moved across the ceiling, then the wall, then drawn by something that did not require full consciousness to Lily's face. Her lips parted. Baby, she whispered. Nana. Lily's voice cracked on the second syllable and held. I'm here. I got lost, but I came. Ruby exhaled. A long, slow breath that carried more in it than a full sentence could have. Boy, she said. Lily shifted Mason so he was visible over the rail. Ruby looked at him and closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, something in her expression had settled as though she had taken inventory and confirmed what she needed to confirm. Victoria stood near the door. She was not sure when she had moved away from it. She stood at the foot of the bed and looked at the woman's face and felt the almost memory from the car arrive, not gradually this time, but all at once. The way memories came when the body finally agreed to release them. A road, rain, not tonight's rain, different rain, 9 years ago, the October rain that came cold and sideways on. I-285 at 2 in the morning. Her car, the guardrail, the burning smell, and a voice steady, commanding, refusing to accept what was happening, saying, Don't you? Close your eyes. Don't you do it. You hear me. Stay with me. Stay. Victoria inhaled sharply. The sound was small enough that it might not have been noticed in another room, but Ruby's eyes moved. They moved from Lily slowly and found Victoria at the foot of the bed. And in the silence that followed, in the careful, halting process of a woman returning from the edge of consciousness to the full weight of the present, recognition arrived. Slow, then certain. You, Ruby said. Her voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but the word held everything. Victoria could not immediately speak. It's the road, Ruby said. Not a question. Yes, ma'am, Victoria said. I-285, 9 years ago. Ruby looked at her for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, You made it. Because you didn't let me go, Victoria said. The room went entirely still. Lily looked between them with the wide-eyed attention of a child encountering something large that she didn't yet have language for. Victoria took a step closer to the bed, and for the first time in the entire night, her composure was not entirely under her control, and she did not try to recover it. Dr. Daniel Reeves was the kind of physician who had clearly spent so many years delivering uncertain news in careful language that he had developed a precise vocabulary for saying difficult things in ways that sounded almost routine. He was in his mid-40s, tired in the particular way of hospital doctors, who kept the tiredness in the area around the eyes while the rest of the face stayed professional. And he found Victoria in the hallway outside Ruby's room at 20 minutes past 10 with a tablet in his hand and the expression of a man who had already done this particular conversation several times tonight. "Miss Ashworth," he said. "Dr. Reeves, what are we looking at?" He kept his voice low and told her cleanly significant blockage in the left anterior descending artery, likely been developing for months, unnoticed. The kind of thing that showed up as fatigue and shortness of breath that a woman raising 2 grandchildren on a fixed income might reasonably have attributed to other causes. She was stable. She needed a procedure. The technical term was a percutaneous coronary intervention, a stent in plain language, and it should happen in the morning rather than waiting. "Financial coverage," Victoria said. "Not a question. There are gaps in her file. Her insurance will cover a portion." "How much is uncovered?" Dr. Reeves paused. "Miss Cooper has authorized us to speak with you. She gave consent when we told her you were here." He gave a number with the slight hesitation of a man who had learned that specific numbers sometimes caused problems. The uncovered portion was approximately $85,000. Victoria said, "Get me your billing administrator's contact and your department head. Tonight, if they're on call. I want the procedure scheduled for first available in the morning." Dr. Reeves looked at her steadily. "I'll need to involve I know what you need. I'm going to call my CFO right now. I'll have a written financial guarantee from Ashworth Capital Group to your billing department within the hour, enough to schedule the procedure tonight. The wire transfer will clear first thing when the banking system opens. Reference name Ruby Mae Cooper. Account number to follow." She pulled out her phone. "Do you need anything else from me to move forward?" He did not need anything else. She stepped to a quieter section of the hallway, near a bank of windows that looked out over the parking structure, and made the call. Her CFO, a precise and unflappable man named Gerald Park, answered on the second ring regardless of the hour, because she paid him to be the kind of man who answered on the second ring regardless of the hour. She told him the amount, the recipient institution, the reference name, and the timeline. He said he'd have the guarantee letter to the billing department within the hour, and the wire confirmation to her by morning. She ended the call and stood at the window for a moment, looking at the rain on the parking structure below. Then her phone lit up with Ethan's name. She looked at the screen. She let it ring 4 times, then answered. "Raymond is still willing to extend the window," Ethan said without preamble in the voice he used when he was being patient with someone who was making his patience difficult. "He's not happy, but he's willing. If you call him tonight before midnight and explain I'm not calling Raymond tonight." "Victoria." Ethan. A pause. "You realize what walking away from this deal looks like." "I realize what it looks like," she said. "Where are you right now?" "The hospital." The silence on the line was precise and communicative. Ethan was a man who chose silences carefully, and this one meant, "I am registering my position without escalating this conversation because I understand that escalating would be counterproductive. But I want you to know my position is registered." "I'll be home later," Victoria said. "Get some sleep." She ended the call and went back to Ruby's room. Lily had followed with a chair beside the bed, her head resting against the mattress, one hand still loosely wrapped around her grandmother's fingers. Mason slept in Lily's arms, his small chest rising and falling with the easy steadiness of a child who had been fed and was somewhere warm. Ruby was awake watching them both, and when Victoria entered, she turned her head slowly toward the door. "You called somebody," Ruby said. It wasn't a question. Victoria came to stand at the foot of the bed. "Yes, ma'am. About the money. The procedure is scheduled for 7 a.m. Ruby was quiet for a moment. Outside the room, the hospital moved with its night rhythms, soft footsteps, a distant announcement over an intercom, the closing of a door somewhere down the hall. "I don't take things I can't pay back," Ruby said. Victoria looked at the folded paper she had been carrying in her hand since the foyer of her house. The soft notebook paper with the blue ink and the pressed-in urgency of its handwriting. She set it on the table beside the bed. "You already paid me," she said, 9 years ago on I-285 at 2 in the morning. You stopped when you didn't have to. You stayed when it was easier to go." Ruby looked at the paper, then at Victoria. She did not argue. She was the kind of woman who had spent enough years dealing with the world as it actually was to recognize truth when it sat down in front of her. And she let it sit. "That girl," Ruby said, nodding toward Lily, "has been carrying more than she should." "I know," Victoria said. "I see it. Most people don't look long enough. I know that too." From inside the building, Victoria heard her phone vibrate in her pocket. Gerald Park. Most likely with the wire transfer confirmation. She left it. Whatever it said could wait 3 more minutes. They moved Ruby to the cardiac unit floor at midnight. A transfer that happened with the quiet efficiency of a system that had done it many thousands of times. Bed repositioned monitors, reattached IV lines, managed without interrupting their flow. Lily woke when the movement started immediately and completely the way children woke when the thing they were afraid of losing was being moved. She walked alongside the bed with one hand resting near the rail, not gripping it but near enough that the contact was available if she needed it, and Ruby's hand found hers without either of them looking down. Victoria and the overnight nurse followed a few steps behind. On the new floor, the quality of the air changed, quieter, cooler, more deliberate than the emergency level below. The room they brought Ruby to was at the end of a short hallway and had a window that looked out over a small courtyard that was invisible in the rain but would be there in the morning. Lily sat beside the bed again. Ruby slept. The monitors made their steady sounds. At some point past 1 in the morning, Victoria stepped out into the hallway to stand at the window above the dark courtyard, and Lily appeared beside her quietly without announcing herself, and stood there too, looking at the wet glass and the reflections of the hallway lights in it. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Lily said, "Miss Ashworth, before all this." A pause. Victoria waited. "Did somebody help you?" "When you needed it," Victoria looked at her reflection in the glass. The question had no guile in it, no strategy, no angle. It was simply what it was, a child asking a genuine question in the way children asked genuine questions, which was directly and without the protective irony that adults develop to shield themselves from the sincerity of their own curiosity. Victoria thought about the right answer for long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. "Yes," she said. "Somebody helped me. A long time ago." "Who?" Victoria turned from the window slightly. "Your grandmother." Lily looked up at her. Her expression didn't perform surprise. She took the information in seriously, as though it had weight and required a moment of accommodation. Then she said, "And you never went back to find her?" It was not said with accusation. It was said the way a child stated something that was simply true, without understanding that true things could also be indictments. Victoria felt it land anyway. "No," she said. "I didn't." Lily was quiet. She leaned her forehead against the cold glass of the window and looked at the dark courtyard below. "I think about that sometimes," she said. "When I help someone, I wonder if they'll remember." Victoria looked at her, this 9-year-old girl who had walked 8 miles in the rain carrying her brother, who had made lists and drawn maps, who had been turned away from door after door and had not given up, and who was now standing in a hospital hallway at 1 in the morning, wondering if the people she helped would remember. She did not have an answer for that. She did not try to manufacture one. What she had instead was the particular irreversible feeling of understanding something about herself that she could not ununderstand, and the knowledge that the next choice she made in this building would be shaped by it. Back in the room, Ruby opened her eyes when they returned. She looked at Lily first, then at Victoria, with the measuring gaze of a woman who had spent a lifetime reading rooms and reading people and had not lost the skill to illness. "You two were talking," Ruby said. "Yes, ma'am," Lily said. "About what Lily thought about it. About remembering people," she said. Ruby looked at Victoria. "That right?" "Yes, ma'am." Ruby was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Some things take their time, coming back around." She said it without drama, without the weight of someone delivering wisdom. She said it the way you said something that was simply and obviously true, the way you noted that it was raining. Victoria sat down in the chair on the other side of the bed. She was going to stay. She had known it since the parking structure, maybe since the foyer, maybe since the moment she had taken the keys from the hook in the kitchen and then taken them again. She was going to stay until this was done, and then she was going to figure out what came after that. Dr. Reeves appeared briefly at 11 to confirm the morning's schedule. He looked at the three of them in the room, the woman in the bed, the child in the chair, the CEO in the corner, and said nothing about the configuration because hospital physicians learned early that people arranged themselves around crisis in the ways that they needed to, and it was not his job to have opinions about it. 7 a.m., he said. "We're ready," Victoria said. Morning came into the room slowly, a pale gray light through the window that found the edges of things before it illuminated them. The rain had stopped somewhere around 4. Victoria knew this because she had been awake at 4, sitting in the corner chair with her jacket across her shoulders. Listening to the shift in sound when the rain stopped and the nighttime city quieted to something closer to silence, Lily had slept against the side of the bed with Mason tucked against her, Ruby's hand loosely in hers. Ruby had slept in intermittent stretches, each time surfacing with a slight adjustment of expression, checking, confirming, returning. At 5:30, Victoria had gotten coffee from the machine at the end of the hall. At 6:15, she had received Gerald Park's final wire transfer confirmation and forwarded it to Dr. Reeves's billing contact. At 6:50, a nurse arrived to begin preparation for the procedure, and the room reorganized itself around the new purpose. Lily was awake and fully present in the way she always seemed to be, completely, immediately, without the gradual return to consciousness that most people required. She stood at the side of the bed and held Ruby's hand, and did not say very much, because there was not very much to say that the holding didn't already cover. "I'll be right outside," Lily told her. "Right outside the door." "I know you will," Ruby said. Her voice was stronger this morning, more itself. She looked at Victoria. "You're staying too." "Yes, ma'am. You don't have to." "I know." Ruby looked at her for a moment with the particular expression she had used several times in the night, assessing, measuring, deciding something. "All right," she said. "All right." At 7:15 they wheeled her out. Lily walked alongside to the last possible step, and then stood at the boundary and watched the doors close, and stood very still. Victoria stood beside her. The hallway was bright and impersonal, and smelled of antiseptic and the faint chemical sweetness of institutional coffee. Lily did not move for a long moment. Then she said, "You're still here." "I told you I would be," Victoria said. A pause. "My grandma said that to me once. About something else." Victoria did not ask what. She sat down in the row of chairs against the wall. After a moment, Lily sat beside her. Mason slept across both their laps, his weight distributed without either of them discussing it. Lily's half and Victoria's half, and the boundary between them something neither needed to name. Victoria's phone had been accumulating messages since 6 a.m. She knew without looking the board. Raymond Cole's assistant. 2 journalists. Her attorney, Ethan. She had looked at one of them, Ethan's, which said, "Only call me when you're free," which she had read as what it was, which was not a message about timing but a message about priorities. She opened her phone and went instead to her email and composed a single message to her board chair, a woman named Diane Holt who had known Victoria for 11 years and was one of the few people who did not require translation. It said, "I'll be unavailable for the next 48 hours. Everything critical can reach Gerald. I am handling a personal matter. I am choosing to handle it personally. Please do not interpret this as an invitation for a conversation about my choices." She sent it. Then she put her phone away. An hour and 40 minutes later, a journalist, who had apparently been tipped off by Raymond, she assumed which was the sort of thing Raymond would do, posted a photograph of Victoria in the hospital hallway with Lily and Mason. The caption said, "Ashworth Capital CEO spends the night in hospital with underprivileged children she met at her gate. PR move or the real thing?" The post was shared 11,000 times in the first 2 hours. 12,000 people replied. Victoria did not see it until much later. By then, it didn't matter what the caption said. 3 days after the procedure, Ruby Mae Cooper was ready to leave Mercy General. The discharge process was exactly what discharge processes were: administrative, methodical, and in the aggregate, very boring. Unless you were the one it was happening to, in which case each piece of paper carried the specific weight of a door opening or closing. Victoria had been present for most of it. Not hovering, but available, the way a person was available when they had decided to see something through and were no longer negotiating that decision with themselves. Dr. Reeves reviewed the post-procedure instructions at the bedside with the clarity of a man who understood that medical information did not stick unless it was given directly and repeated. Statin medication, antiplatelet therapy, dietary adjustments, a follow-up in 2 weeks, no strenuous activity for the first month, home care 3 times a week for the first 2. Victoria had already arranged the home care through a service Gerald had vetted the day before. She had also arranged something else. They went to Vine City first, to the apartment building on Hollowell Parkway where Ruby and the children had lived for 9 years, to collect what needed to be collected. The building was functional and worn in the specific way of places that had once been cared for by a landlord who no longer cared, the lobby tile uneven in 2 places, the hallway light on the 3rd floor slightly too dim, the elevator reliable enough most days. Ruby's apartment was on the 2nd floor, and it was immediately and unmistakably hers, small but organized with the particular precision of someone who had learned that dignity in limited space required systems. Folded blankets on the armchair, dishes stacked with the handles aligned, a shelf of photographs with the frames positioned at angles that suggested they had each been placed with individual consideration. Lily moved through it quickly, gathering what she needed with the efficiency of a child who knew exactly where everything was and had an implicit understanding of what was necessary and what was not. A small backpack, Mason's blanket, the specific one he slept with, a change of clothes for each of them. She was done in 4 minutes. Victoria stood near the door and watched, and then she moved to the shelf of photographs. She looked at them without picking them up. Ruby at a younger age, somewhere outdoors, a man Victoria didn't recognize. A school portrait of Lily from what looked like 1st grade, missing a front tooth, and smiling, as though this was the funniest thing that had ever happened to anyone. Ruby noticed Victoria looking. "That's from 2 years ago," Ruby said, from the bedroom doorway. "She still smiles like that." "She does," Victoria said. She turned from the shelf. "I want to ask you about Old 4th Ward." Ruby looked at her steadily. "What about it?" "There's a house there. 3 bedrooms, ground floor, private yard. It belonged to a client of mine who relocated to Seattle 18 months ago and hasn't sold it because the market timing wasn't right. It's been managed. It's clean. It's near Coretta Scott King, Young Women's Leadership Academy, which is 4 blocks from the corner of Boulevard and Edgewood." Ruby's expression did not change. She had the quality of a woman who had trained herself not to respond to things before she had finished hearing them. "I'm not offering charity," Victoria said. I know what that word means to you. I'm telling you that a debt that has gone unpaid for 9 years is going to be paid now in a form that is actually useful, which is the form of a family not having to worry about whether the landlord fixes the elevator this winter. Ruby looked at her for a very long time. The apartment was quiet around them, Lily in the other room, with Mason, the sounds of Hollowell Parkway outside the window, a bus going by. Someone's radio from a floor above. The school, Ruby said. It's a good school, Victoria said. Lily would have a scholarship. Ruby turned and looked at Lily, who had appeared in the hallway with her backpack and Mason on her hip, and was watching the adults with the focused attention of a child who understood that something was being decided about her future and was trying to read the outcome from their faces. Nana Lily said carefully. She said Old Fourth Ward. I heard her. Ruby looked back at Victoria. This isn't you fixing something for your own conscience. No, Victoria said. It's not about my conscience. It's about what's actually right. Those are different things. Ruby was quiet for another moment. Then she said, All right. They left the apartment at noon. Lily didn't look back as they went down the stairs, but on the second-to-last step she paused for exactly 1 second, and then continued. And Victoria understood that the pause was its own kind of acknowledgement of what the place had been, of what it had managed to hold, of the fact that leaving it was not a loss but a step. The house on Boulevard in Old Fourth Ward was a 1940s craftsman, with a front porch and oak trees that had grown large enough over the decades to arch over the sidewalk and make a kind of corridor of shade in the summer. The yard was enclosed by a low fence. The inside smelled of clean wood and a faint trace of cedar. It was the kind of house that had been built to be lived in rather than to impress anyone, and it showed its age without apology, and for that reason it looked more like a home than most of the properties on Victoria's various corporate balance sheets. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon in mid-October, 3 weeks after the night Lily had knocked on the door on the estate in Buckhead. Ruby walked up the porch steps slowly, one hand on the railing, assessing the place with the unhurried thoroughness of a woman who had no intention of moving again and was therefore inspecting accordingly. Lily carried Mason up the steps ahead of her and stood on the porch with her hand on the doorframe looking at the street and then at the trees and then at the way the afternoon light fell across the porch boards. Victoria stood at the foot of the steps and watched. She had been in this position in various forms for 3 weeks now, not leading, not directing, but present. She had called her board twice. She had declined one interview, accepted another where she had said nothing about Ruby or Lily, and had instead talked about the company's Q4 positioning until the journalist got bored. She had not called Raymond Cole. She had not needed to. Raymond Cole's company was currently the subject of a labor practices inquiry that had originated from an anonymous tip that Victoria had not made and had not needed to make. 3 of his board members had already publicly distanced themselves. The $500 million deal was a historical artifact. Ethan had come to the house, their house, in Buckhead, the one with the automated gate that had since been repaired on a Tuesday evening 10 days ago. He had not come to apologize. He had come with a document from his attorney stating his intention to sell his 30% stake in Ashworth Capital. He had sold it to a real estate development fund, not to Raymond as she had initially feared, but to someone else entirely, someone she could manage. The paperwork had gone through Gerald Park's office with the mechanical efficiency of things that had already been decided. Ethan had left the Buckhead house. Victoria had stayed. She had stayed in the big quiet house with its 4 extra bedrooms and its kitchen in which she had once heated milk in a small saucepan. And she had not been lonely. She had been for the first time in a long time simply by herself. That was different. Now she stood at the foot of the porch steps on Boulevard and watched Lily look at the street, and she was still by herself. But the word meant something different here than it did in Buckhead. Miss Ashworth, Lily said. You said you'd keep the light on. Victoria looked at her. On the evening they had left the hospital in the car, Lily had asked if Victoria was going to keep the lamp in the front window. The red lamp, the one that looked warm, the one that was in the drawing in the notebook. Victoria had said yes. She had meant it as a small comfort, something to offer in the space of a difficult conversation. She had gone home that night and found the house empty, and the lamp still on in the front window where she had left it before the storm. And she had not turned it off. She had not turned it off since. She had understood something in the past 3 weeks that she did not have elegant language for, but that she understood clearly in the way of things that did not require language. The light in the window was not a symbol. It was not a gesture. It was a decision. The decision to be the kind of person whose house had a light on, the kind of person you could find in the dark if you were lost enough and brave enough and had nowhere else to go. She had not always been that person. She intended to be now. "I kept it on," she told Lily. Lily nodded, the small, precise nod of someone confirming something they had already believed. Then she turned and helped Ruby through the front door of the house, and Mason toddled after them, and Victoria stood on the porch in the October light for a moment before following. 6 months later, at the fall assembly of the Coretta Scott King Young Women's Leadership Academy on Boulevard, a 4th grader named Lily Cooper stood at the podium in the school auditorium and read an essay she had written for the occasion. The essay was about the night she had gotten lost in the rain. It was about the houses where the lights had gone out and the doors had stayed closed. And it was about what it felt like to walk 8 miles and still keep moving. It was about her grandmother and what her grandmother had done 9 years ago on a dark highway, and what that had meant even though her grandmother had never told anyone about it and had not considered it remarkable. It was about the difference between a house that was locked and a house that was home. And near the end, she described a lamp in a window red, warm-looking, the kind of light that looked like somebody was still awake, still present, still willing to be found. She did not use a name. She did not need to. In the 3rd row of the auditorium, Victoria Ashworth sat with her hands in her lap and listened to a 9-year-old girl describe her in terms she had not earned until 3 weeks before she had been given them. And for the first time in her adult life, she did not manage what was happening on her face. Ruby, seated beside her, reached over without looking and rested her hand over Victoria's once, briefly the way she had rested her hand on a stranger's arm on a dark highway 9 years ago. Steady, certain, enough. Victoria looked at the stage, where Lily was finishing her essay, with the particular composure of a child who had learned composure not from instruction, but from necessity, and understood that this room, this family, this ordinary Thursday in October, was not the end of something. It was what things looked like when they had been returned to where they belonged. The light in the window of the house on Peachtree Road was still on. It would be on when she got home. Some things once decided did not need to be decided again.